Yeah.
And here we go now. Welcome to the day number 6 during Nordic Climate Action Weeks. We are here in Stockholm and we are in Madrid. And before we start today's brief from Madrid, I would like to remind you of the fact that we expect you to be active on social media. Please remember our hashtag, Nordic Climate Action, when you comment on what is being said. But now I give the word to André and Ludwig in Madrid.
And a warm welcome to everyone to this negotiation briefing from COP25, also here from Madrid. Welcome also to the audience here in the Nordic Pavilion. My name is, as Mary said, André Jamholt, and I will be moderating this briefing. And with me here on the stage, I have Ludwig Bengtsson, who is the Nordic, or the Swedish youth delegate to COP25. Welcome. We are very excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
And to get down to business, we are now halfway through COP25. What is your thoughts on the negotiations so far?
I think my general thought is that the discrepancy between what we see on the streets and what we see from the science-related events here to what we see in the negotiation rooms is very big. It's not the same urgency that I would have liked to see from the negotiators. And sad to say it, on most of the agenda items, we are still not where we need to be at this point.
We were talking before we started about what was the topics for today's discussion, but it's not really how it works. It is the same topics that go through the whole week. Have there been any movement so far?
Well, I think in the two big items that are discussed are the Article 6 and the Paris Agreement and the loss and damage issue in the Warsaw mechanism. And on Article 6, we're still quite stuck, I'm sad to say. Might need to leave it for the politicians next week to really figure that one out. Loss and damage, we've seen some movements, and we're having two negotiations today that might unloosen some of the tensions that have been. So that looks more promising, I would say.
So,
may I interrupt 1 second?
Yes,
is that
please.
okay? Because we had the Swedish head of delegation with us yesterday, and he didn't want to tell us who it is that is slowing these things up. He was very diplomatic. I was wondering, Ludwig, whether you could enlighten us a little bit on why this is going more slowly than expected.
I don't think I can do that, unfortunately, but we can say that the positions have become clearer, that's for sure. And in the loss and damage negotiations, it's really not a matter of one or a few countries stopping or blocking. It is a general disagreement between different groups. And so that's, I think that's all I can say actually on that.
The politicians is, as you said, arriving next week, and they have to kind of find the solution for this. Are you optimistic as to if they can come to a consensus on this?
They might be able to. Yeah, you never know. Once the politicians arrive, things can happen very quickly and the situation can change quite rapidly. But I think we can't rely on COP25 solving the climate crisis. We won't exit COP25 and say, yeah, we did it, because that's just not the things that are on the agenda are not enough to do that. So we still need to look to cities, to regions, to the private sector, to these other arenas as well. We need to do all of these things at the same time.
You can't tell us who is kind of blocking the negotiations, but could you tell us a little bit about the problems? Why is it that we can't reach an agreement on this, or why it's so difficult?
So on Article 6, there are certain things that many developed countries, the EU, US, can't accept because they would hinder the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It would make a lot of things undone. And so there's a very hard line there that you can't cross. And that's why it's very sensitive on that topic. And on loss and damage, it is really a a matter of how, because loss and damage is the things that we lose from climate change that we can't adapt to and that can't mitigate our way out of. And so it's a very sensitive and very emotional issue, because right now there are typhoons in the Philippines, for instance, which have cost millions of dollars in damages and several, I think it's 13 lives at this point. So these damages are real, and somehow we need to help developing countries deal with them. The way we deal with them, that's the topic of discussion, where finance is really what's being discussed. How much finance, in which way we're going to finance it, or if we're going to finance it.
In the Nordics, we kind of pride ourselves as to being front runners in these matters. But what could small countries like Sweden and the other Nordic countries do to kind of get the bigger countries and maybe the bigger polluters to kind of rise to the occasion and be more ambitious? Is there anything we can do?
I mean, I firmly believe that showing leadership is really the way to go. That's primarily the tool we have. If we can show that it is much better to live a life without fossil fuels and the government works better, industry works better, then we can spread that example. And we are already doing. A lot of people want to know what the Nordic countries are doing and how they are solving this issue. So if we do what we do and even faster and even better, that's a primary way we can do it. But also, I mean, this next week, we can put pressure on countries that are lagging behind. We can try and ask them, why are you not doing more and how can we help? And I really wish that the Nordic politicians do that next week.
How much do the Nordic politicians speak with one voice, or do they speak more as separate countries?
Well, I mean, we speak as the EU, for instance, and the EU members in the Nordic countries do that as well. And the non-EU members of the Nordic countries speak not as the EU. So that's a short answer for that.
That's a short answer, but is that a good thing? Wouldn't it be a good thing if the Nordics would speak together? Because we are sometimes more alike than we are with all the other EU countries.
If a unified voice means that it's a more ambitious voice, then yes. Otherwise, no.
That's clear.
But are the Nordic countries in themselves ambitious enough, in your mind?
No one is ambitious enough. And I think the Sweden has been quite clear on that we need to do even more than we're doing. We've set some good targets, 2045 carbon neutral, 2030, have some strong goals there as well. But at the moment, our emissions curves are not bending. Our emissions are still increasing. And as long as they're doing that, we can never say that we are doing enough.
Harsh message. I think it's time to open up for questions from the audience. And Mary, would you?
Yes, I'll have a look here. I have one question here.
Hello, my name is Stian Fjellal. I work at the Nordic Council of Ministers. I was wondering if are you a new youth delegate? And if so, could you tell us a bit about the experience being a youth delegate? Because as far as I know, the Nordic countries are the only ones sending youth delegates to the negotiations.
So the Nordic countries are not the only ones sending youth delegates. There's quite a few countries, most of them European. And we all have quite different mandates and different relationships to the delegations. Some just get accredited and come here and represent the voice of youth, and some, like me, sit in the delegations and take part in the negotiations. So we have quite different experiences. And I mean, my role is to be some sort of connection between young people and between the delegation to ensure that our voice is being heard, even inside those rooms that we normally don't frequent. And I think so far that has been my experience, that we are allowed to speak and give input. Whether that voice is then converted into action, we have yet to see. I think that's next week we really see if we actually had an impact on this COP.
Do we have more questions from here? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Anna from, I'm studying international law in Finland, and I'm wondering how well the Indigenous people's voice is heard during the conference, because at the last conference they were talking about how it should be, like Indigenous knowledge is really key to solving the climate issue, so I'm wondering if they're actually represented in the negotiations.
That's a really good point. And actually, my experience has been that there's been a lot of Indigenous activity here. There was a lot of worry that the switch of location would disable a lot of people from coming here, but we've seen a lot of presence, a lot of actions. The local peoples and the Indigenous peoples platform actually is the only one that's reached a decision. So that's good. And we continue seeing them more on these platforms.
Any
Maria?
more questions from Stockholm?
Maybe we have a question here in Madrid. Is anyone keen to ask Ludwig a question? We have one question down there.
Yeah,
Please state your name and...
Yeah. Hi, I'm Eric from the Lutheran World Federation, representing Church of Sweden. I'm just thinking about what your thoughts about youth role here at COP, and like what do you think about the youth movement that has been here, and also a couple of thoughts about what you think of the Swedish delegation's ambitions and the Swedish climate laws. Are they good enough, or what do you think?
So youth here at COP25, I mean, we saw youth out in masses yesterday, and that was really impressive. And I was in a meeting with Patricia Espinosa, the executive secretary of UNFCCC this morning, and she seemed very taken and really urged increased ambition and pointed to the urgency. So I think the youth voice is heard by the leaders, but as I said in the beginning, it's not entering the negotiation rooms. And I don't have answers on how we fix that, more than to say, please listen to us and actually act on what we're saying. That could be my only answer for that. And when it comes to the Swedish climate laws, I think my analysis is that the things we put on the table are good, but we need to make sure that they are implemented. And this action plan that's set to be released before the end of this year, I haven't read it. I don't know if it's released. I'm in the negotiations, so I don't have time to read the news. But that is really the vital document we need to see if that holds up or not.
I would like to continue on what you just said about the negotiating rooms, because we touched upon that also yesterday, and exactly as you say, the head of a delegation, Matthias Frumere, he also said that the voice of the young does not get into the negotiating rooms. And but that was before we knew that 500,000 people had been out on the streets yesterday. So what my question to you would be that, and I know that this is possibly impossible for you to answer, but what do you think that needs to happen in order for these voices to be loud enough and clear enough so that they can't be not heard in the rooms?
So first, I'd just like to say that now this first week is civil servants are negotiating on a mandate from governments. And so they have certain things that they are supposed to achieve. So their flexibility is much less than the politicians which arrive next week. So I think the politicians next week, they can act more on this new surge of youth here in Madrid. What was the second question?
No, it was actually, the second question was what needs to happen in order for things to, the action to start happening, to reach the rooms.
That is the question I'm asking myself. Because I mean, we've been doing this and we keep gathering more and more young people, but the emissions are not curbing yet. And so I'd happily accept input on that. Because we need to do something. That's very clear. The IPCC have had several presentations during this week, pointing to the urgency. And I mean, these are scientists that are quite dry. They normally don't use words that evoke emotion, but they are doing that now, and they've been doing that for a couple of years. And we still don't see emissions going down.
Actually, that was what I was going to add here, that it is not only the young that demand action now. It's lots of adult people, and these are also young adults, many of those out in the streets now. So it's getting more and more a democracy problem, don't you agree?
Well, yes, in the end, if everybody is running faster than the governments, then people will start questioning whether governments should be the ones who take action on this. I still believe that they have a chance to remedy that, but I agree, it might become a democracy problem.
Mario, we have another question here in Madrid. Please.
Hi, I'm David Williams from the Climate Service Center in Hamburg, which isn't quite Nordic, but close enough, I think. I was just wondering, so I work at a climate research institute, and my background is in science. So I took part as to give scientific input to a Fridays for Future event recently, and one of the accusations that was leveled at me is that the voice of science isn't being heard enough, and that scientists need to engage more in activism. So I was just wondering, am I more used in my climate research center on a Friday, or should I be out on the street with Greta Thunberg?
I also work at a university when I'm not here. So I can feel, and I've gotten those same criticisms leveled at me. And I think for these events, when there is so much pressure to be scientific and be accurate, and any amount of activism, real or perceived, from scientists is questioned by parties who want to hinder progress on climate action, then you might have to stick to being that dry science person. But I think we could be much more creative in how we communicate the science and how we translate the science into the real lived experiences of people. And there's a lot of good work being done on that, with using arts and other creative ways of imagining this life. But I think you should really still stick to science. We need good science as well. And we need that legitimacy of people saying, okay, I only do science. This is what I've done all my life. And I say full-heartedly that this is an urgent crisis, because we need that voice as well.
Mary, it seemed like you had another question there in Stockholm.
I have one.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could elaborate on the difference between this week and the next week with a civil servant, discussing, and this week, and the politicians coming next week. It might be a different environment for taking decisions. Could you elaborate on how is there a kind of a tension building up? How's the mood in the rooms, and could you describe that?
So this first week, we try to get as far as we can, and some issues might be solved the first week, and then the politicians simply have to see, okay, can we still accept this? But some of the trickier issues, those that are not maybe just technical but also really political, that's where the politicians come in. And next week, we'll see high-level statements and bilaterals and these discussions to try to get these decisions made, so that by next Friday, when the COP and the CMA and these meetings are set to close, we actually have decisions that can be accepted by all parties. So I think, yeah, next week, the tensions will increase. And I think also the height of discussion will increase. There will be harsher words thrown, I think.
Do we have questions here in Stockholm? No, we don't. André, do you have questions in Madrid?
Yes, we have a question here in Madrid.
Yes, my name is Mats Lindqvist, and I also work for the Nordic Council of Ministers. And you said earlier that no country is doing enough. If you were to be a climate dictator, what kind of measures would you do right away?
I don't think climate dictatorship is a good way to go, just for the record. And I mean, that is also the problem, that it is really hard to make these decisions. But I mean, stop subsidizing fossil fuels is one of the biggest and most urgent things you can do. There's no need to subsidize something that you're already going to be phasing out. I think that would be my first and biggest. That would really do a lot, because there's a lot of money going towards fossil fuels still, even after all parties have signed the Paris Agreement. They're supposed to phase out fossil fuels.
That's it from Stockholm, I think.
Yes, I just have one more question for you, Ludwig, because I couldn't be in the city center of Madrid yesterday, where there was thousands, or 500,000, I think it was. How was it?
I've heard it was amazing.
You won't confirm, or?
The pictures I've seen makes me almost have experienced it.
That was a cryptic answer, but still, I accept it. Okay, then I think we have come to the end of this briefing from Madrid today. And you will continue in Stockholm, Mary.
We will continue in Stockholm. Thank you to Madrid. And we are now, I don't know if the camera can get it, but we are preparing for something very special here, a food event that will, I think, blow our minds here in a while. You will continue with a different program in Madrid, but you will see us later in the evening. See you
Thank you,
then.
Mary.
Bye-bye. And thank you.
And thank you to our audience here in